Welcome, everybody, to the Media Edge Summit, which is, of course, part of the Edge Computing World event. And I'm Colin Dixon, founder and chief analyst with Endscreen Media. And I'm here to really shepherd us through a series of presentations to look at how media is being impacted by the Edge and how Edge is really enabling new forms of media. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to sort of get us centered and get us introduced to the topics that we're going to be talking today. Now, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was spending a lot of time writing about virtual reality and augmented reality. And there was really a tremendous amount of hype around the technology. And it seemed like we were making tremendous strides in capture, in production, and in rendering. In fact, I remember in 2016 going up to San Francisco for a demonstration from Halsey Minor's Reality Labs Networks of his live planet 360-degree camera. And it's the first time I think I can truly say I've had an out-of-body experience, because I was actually able to look at myself across the room looking at the camera. It was pretty strange experience. And of course, we made tremendous strides with the hardware, with Oculus, with HoloLens from Microsoft, and even Google Cardboard helped us move forward. And a lot of us experience the virtual reality experience without having to make a big investment up front. And in fact, I even have several colleagues who started up production companies for media to produce VR movies, and they actually produced some, although I don't think they were seen by a lot of people. So there was a great deal of hype, a great deal of belief that we were actually in a sprint to the finish for VR and AR. But as so often happens with these technologies, it isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And here we are 6 years later, and well, we certainly aren't regularly watching VR movies and getting AR experiences, certainly not in our everyday lives. And I got to say, for me and for the industry, the hype has cooled a lot. And part of the reason for the cooling of that hype is because the industry ran into some fundamental issues which really stopped it crossing that chasm and becoming a mainstream experience and a mainstream entertainment mode for the majority of people. And I'm thinking of things like the requirements that we have very heavy clients doing a lot of the processing. A lot of those early demonstrations, a lot of those early projects relied on a pretty beefy cell phone. But we also had a lot of bandwidth limitations, which meant that we couldn't have full HD quality video in a VR environment, for example. And of course, we also had latency, and latency, well, that's pretty much death for a VR experience. However, we have learned some things over the last 6 years. The industry has progressed forward, and we're certainly going to be looking a lot at that today. And in fact, what we're seeing an opportunity now for the infrastructure, 5G, and content to come together to really solve the problems that have really held us back and made extended reality experiences very difficult to provide to the regular person. And as I say, that is what we will be talking about today. Now, we have several presentations for you that I think you're really going to enjoy. First up, we will have Zach Blitz from Riot Games, who'll be talking about edge computing in gaming, followed by Albert Kim from Double Me, who'll be talking about how edge computing facilitates the metaverse. I can't wait for that one. And then we'll have spatial computing enabled by 5G and beyond from Ali Daniali from T-Mobile. And finally, we'll have some data behind the progress that the industry is making from Dave McCarthy at IDC. So a really packed show, I think, for us today. Now I'd like to invite Ali Daniali, who is Principal Engineer, Immersive Engineering and Experience at T-Mobile, to the stage. He's going to be talking to us about spatial computing enabled by 5G and beyond. Ali, the stage is yours.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, there's my slide. Great. So I'm a principal engineer at T-Mobile, have been working on XR and the infrastructure that will enable XR on our mobile network for about 2.5 years now. And what I'd like to share with you is um, an actual event that happened. We actually did some remote rendering over our 5G, private 5G, and just a couple of weeks ago, and I felt like it was the right presentation to give you and give you the details on the experience and how we leverage a lot of partners to come together. And I want to thank our partners, and I'll go through it. So back in April, we made an announcement that T-Mobile and Lumen have partnered to provide a nationwide Lumen Edge platform, and we've been doing some amazing work with Lumen, and there's some key points that I want to. These are some items I'll just kind of go really fast. You know, T-Mobile is America's 5G leader. We're covering 287 million people across 1.6 million square miles. With Sprint now part of T-Mobile, we've widened the lead and we've rolled out ultra capacity 5G across the country, and that's bringing fast 5G speeds into more places. And we're delivering speeds that are significant, 300 megabits per second with peaks of 1 gigabit using wireless, covering 125 million people. We've got independent organizations testing us and coming back and saying, yes, we've got the highest 5G speed scores and we're the most reliable, and we're a 5G leader in the US. And also, again, OpenSignal has come back and said, yes, our download speeds are the fastest. We've got the fastest upload speeds, and 5G signal is, you get it more often. So quick overview of what's going on. And then with Lumen, what's amazing is that their coverage is 98% of US enterprises. And the latency for their network is amazing with the 5 millisecond tolerance. They have more public available nodes and providing public and private third-party data centers. So whether across the world, but we're focused on the US. And what's great is you can use this edge computing platform with whether it's AWS, Microsoft Azure, or whatever you need to be able to actually utilize their edge compute. So let me jump in to actually what we did. And we used, T-Mobile's 5G network and the HCC Vive Focus 3 and the Lumen Edge. And this really simplistic diagram, and I have a more in-depth one, but this simplistic diagram shows how content was remote rendered on the Lumen Edge, and then we used private 5G CBRS with to actually create this network and render the content that was 3 miles away. And I experienced this with controllers, the headset, and what's what was very interesting was that how buttery smooth the experience was by just remote rendering this. And the reason this is important is that the the amount of compute that was necessary to be able to do this rendering was much higher than what was available to actually compute on the headset, because the focus isn't tethered to a PC. You can actually provide and render much higher polygon count content, whether it be a game, training, a digital twin. This compute is happening at the Lumen Edge, and then using deep peering, we're going through the T-Mobile network and providing it right there on the headset. So kind of a breakdown, we had this demo occurred both in Los Angeles, Seattle, and this I'm in Seattle and I experienced this, and in Denver. So here's some specs that were part of this experience. You know, we had the ability to go up to 16 VR users, but for our demo, we used 4. What was amazing was the round trip latency under 10 milliseconds. I watched as we did the latency testing, and you know, it was between uh, from 4 to 10 milliseconds, and you know, we had amazing reliability. Some our throughput, you know, was achieved with a backhaul of fiber, and we had great upload throughput as well. And the area for the demo was, you know, about a 10-meter radius from the radio. So there we go. So why do we want to do this? Why is this important? When you compare it between tethering, an all-in-one local rendering, or all-in-one cloud rendering. You know, when you look at some these categories of content rendering quality, mobility, battery consumption, and scalability, you get the best quality when you're doing things on the cloud or the edge cloud. And that's because you have this unlimited amount of GPU power that you can throw at any sort of content and then stream it. So what happens is because of that, you're cutting the cord, you're a lot more mobile. And because you're not using the device to actually do the rendering, battery consumption is much less. And you don't feel the heat on your head because it's not doing as much work. And then it's a lot more scalable when you compare it to, you know, using a compute that's in the same room. You can, some of the numbers, you know, with a T4, being able to provide 16 users a multi-user experience, all rendered from the local edge, is phenomenal. So, you know, there are key important features of bringing this mobile edge rendering. And the industry is slowly going here. And when you do experience it and you're able to see it in real life, it's a mind-blowing experience. So let me just kind of pull back and show you kind of on a macro level why private 5G is an important component here. And it's really about control and security. By providing 5G as and the network slicing to create your private 5G, you're able to use the public macro network and private edge computing to be able to bring things like mobility-focused XR and gaming, provide control of drones and quality of vehicles, or even be able to do home training. And with using the public macro, but having the ability to use network slicing to segment and prioritize traffic, the traffic can then go to certain deep peered network availability zones and do this limitless XR remote rendering that I'm showing here. And then it could then go to cloud providers. Not everything needs to be actually generated on the edge. It can also go to public cloud. And then having the ability to geographically distribute and a network that's secure allows you to put different kinds of compute and for different kinds of applications. And as it moves across geographically, make sure that that data is being provided at the highest bandwidth, the lowest latency, and the lowest jitter. So that I just wanted to, this is the my last slide, and I wanted to if there's any questions during our panel, I'll be happy to answer it.
Ali, thank you. That was a fascinating look at that 5G architecture. I don't think I've seen it laid out quite so much in detail. I just had one question before we go to the next presentation. Well, I didn't have one question. I'll save the rest for our panel discussion. But I was wondering about you said the words unlimited rendering to clients. Does you mentioned that in this particular demo it was sized for 16 and you had 4. Do you see degradation in bandwidth and or latency the more people that join the session, and how does that work? Is it a linear relationship or some other?
That's a really great question. When we utilize 5G network slicing, we're creating a profile of commitment to that client, and that gets prioritized across the wireless network. So if obviously there's a plan that goes along with that, and if it's important for the rendering to being to have multiple people, then we make sure that that cell site and everything in between it are prioritized to deliver the content. Now, if it's not network sliced, then you are then competing with other traffic that's happening on the public network and the internet network. But now that we have been able to squeeze as much as possible using these new 5G standards with network slicing, you can commit certain types of profiles to your kind of content.
So that sounds like, for now at least, that's probably the optimal way to deploy XR experiences, right? You decide, I'm going to commit to deliver to 16. I'm going to annex off enough bandwidth and capacity to do that, and then I get that buttery smooth delivery. Yes. Right.
Of course. Yeah. And the private network part is another piece of making sure you have the compute also to manage those expectations from your content and usage.
Very good. Very good. Great. Ali, thank you. That was fascinating presentation. We'll see you at the end for the panel discussion. Let's get into our panel session. So I'd like, if we could bring all the panelists in, please. Thank you all. Welcome. And I'd like to kick off a sort of general question for each of you, and I'll give you a couple of minutes on this for each of you. And I particularly want to start with Albert and Zach on this first question. So when you think about the deployment of your advanced entertainment services. I'm really interested in where you see the major barriers or struggles right now. Zach, in particular, when you talked about your problems in Mexico, that was pretty interesting. Where are you seeing the barriers to really pushing forward the experiences that you're providing? So we'll start with you, Zach, on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think people who have worked in this industry probably longer than I have can speak to the geopolitical nature in some of the areas that are outside of, let's say, the United States and Europe, where connectivity centers don't necessarily want to talk to one another. I'm thinking specifically of places like the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and extending the edge to those places, because there's a ton of players for us that want to play our games in those places. And the way that the providers, I think, talk to one another or don't talk to one another is tremendously challenging. So we spend a lot of time geopolitically kind of trying to wade through to see who has the right connections to extend the edge to those places, to be able to serve those players and really hyper serve those players with the low latency game experiences that we're after providing.
Right. That's pretty interesting. That word partnering has come up a lot. Albert, you have looks like a whole village of folks that are helping you provide your experiences. Talk to us a little bit about some of the barriers that you're seeing in being able to provide that.
So the technical challenges up till now has been, creating the content and sharing with other like-minded telcos. So although the content is created from one country, one city, and then different cities and different telco infrastructure is supposed to receive it, the same content, just like the roaming feature what we have now. So actually, that has been being solved with our telco partner Telefonica, Orange, and Deutsche Telekom together with the current project. But the biggest challenge nobody's still talking about, not talking about, is the cost, because we move all the computational requirement onto the cloud. So at the end, when we finally commercialize like globally, who's going to pay for all the computational cost? So that's the biggest conundrum for the telcos and us, and then all the service providers who are still like really eager to bring everything onto the edge computing, but every single the computational the requirement cost. So that's something that we have to figure out.
Yeah, we're definitely going to return to that topic. Ali, so what do you see as some of the barriers? You've just done this demo, which apparently was a big success. What were some of the problems that you had to overcome? What are some of the problems that you're seeing there in scaling that out to commercial launch?
Well, we're just getting into the time where headsets and network and edge computer starting to converge, and we are pushing the boundaries of what the technology can do. I think the biggest challenge is the standardization that happens from 3GPP and the speed that those get adopted. And we might think, oh, this is easy, but it isn't. It's this whole ecosystem of adoption, and then having the vendors that take on those specifications, and then eventually coming into the telco. So, and then prioritizing all those different kinds of standards. So I think that's one of the big challenges that slow the level of progress. The companies that sometimes step out and go a little bit further ahead, that happens, and sometimes they succeed, sometimes they go bankrupt. But it's all a great learning experience. I think we're at just the beginnings of this, and we're going towards a world where the phone as we know it is disappearing, where you're going to have wearables that become all day wear, And how is that going to happen? It obviously the wearable isn't going to have that compute on it. It's going to live somewhere close to it. Is it going to be in your pocket, far edge, or is it going to be near edge in the data center? That's all right now being built to be able to get to that world.
Very good. So Dave, I want to turn to you. Ali said something very interesting there. He said standards, that we need some standards to be rolled out and adopted more broadly. And I said at the very beginning, one of the things I said was that this wasn't a race, it was a marathon. Ali said we're early on. Where are we in the marathon? Are we at mile 5, mile 10, mile 15? Where are we?
My goodness. Well, I think every industry is on its own sort of journey into this. And I do think that in some cases, you can view, it just depends on where you want to look at that spectrum of technology. I mean, there's, as I mentioned, CDNs were doing sort of distributed compute and content delivery for a really long time. I think what's changing for them is the type of content that they're handling or being asked to handle now has changed a lot. And so on one hand, they have an advantage in the fact that they already have the footprint and they have the network connectivity and things that are there. But then, in the process of launching all these new services, that kind of next generation of applications that can ride on top of that part is still absolutely new. And so I think, almost all of these services that we're talking about have been around maybe 2 years at the most, but many of them even just within this last year. So I think there's a lot of learning going on. There's a lot of experimentation. And I think, as some of the other speakers have mentioned, the more you sort of distribute globally, the level of complexity can increase. And that's still a challenge I think people are working through.
Very good. And I'd like to come back to Zach and ask you about something that Albert says about the cost of that compute. My impression as you went through your demonstration and your discussion and the demonstrations was, boy, this looks like this is expensive to provide these real-time experiences, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've defrayed the costs, I think, over about a decade. So hopefully it hasn't been too much at once. I mean, we built our edge, direct over a period of about 10 years. And we've done it in phases where we started originally for League of Legends and then extended it based on the latency requirements. So it wasn't too big of a financial outlay at once. It was kind of smoothed over a period of time. But I do tell a story right around the time when we were starting to look at Valorant. We looked at 3 cost models, one of which was extremely expensive, which I think was everybody under 10 milliseconds globally, which would have been insane. The other where we landed was 90% under 35. And then one still that was, I think, higher. It was like 70% under 50. We shot for the middle just because we thought the game's thesis was best met there, and the market, in order to make good margins on these games was going to be there as well. But we do, I think it helps to be at a company whose ethos is player experience first, and we'll willingly kind of overspend on things like infrastructure if it does mean that players are going to have the best experience available to them, so long as the game is viable. So but it was and remains, I think, pretty expensive. We're still in the progress of scaling down, I think, some of the connectivity that we had used for launch in terms of bandwidth. The amount of people, we tried to launch that game at the beginning of our closed beta. Our closed beta was at the beginning of COVID, and we had this like captive audience of pretty much everyone on Twitch watching the game. And so we built towards what we thought that captive audience was going to be, which was far greater than kind of the initial launch. And so we're still in the progress of scaling that back, but that's a bit of a dance because we don't want players to ever have a bad experience playing the game. And if we scale back too much, if we get another peak or influx of players, we might increase latency in a way that's not favorable to the experience.
Right. So I would like to pitch a question to Ali and Dave. This actually came up as you were giving your presentation, Dave, and so I'll give you first swing at it. One of the things that the CDNs have been telling me, I track the OTT video very, very closely. And one of the things that they told me is that they had to accelerate the deployment of compute power, to handle the load during the COVID-19 and the lockdowns, etc. And that basically had them bring forward the build outs that they're continuing to do, and they do continue to build out their networks. I'm wondering if we saw the same thing with Edge, and if that also saw an acceleration in deployment during COVID. So why don't we start with you, Dave, on that? Did you note anything going on?
Yeah, I mean, I can. Well, number one, I can, I guess, confirm, that my spies are telling you the same thing that your spies are saying. As far as when we look at one of the things we track is, what are people spending? What are service providers spending on equipment, right, and facilities to build out new capabilities? And in some industries, you saw a decrease in 2020 as people were trying to figure out, how to handle this. But one of the industries that saw a major increase has been, the CDN market and other sort of content delivery services for that very exact reason. And it kind of, again, goes a little bit back to sort of these data flows. I mean, if you think about what the pandemic did in terms of changing network patterns, for some companies, it caused a huge amount of headaches. Like Microsoft actually had some crazy Azure trouble because, they were expecting a certain pattern of concentration of where people were and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, when in almost like less than a month, everybody's patterns completely changed. Absolutely, they were playing catch up to try to do that. And and I will say that while you can it's kind of like you always want to try to balance some of these things, because for every good story I can tell you, there's also sort of a story of somebody that's just been delayed on some of their edge deployments. And so it's not been evenly spread across everyone in the industry. But I do think that even companies like retail and other organizations were looking at some of their accelerating some of their edge deployments, because part of it was under that umbrella of digital transformation, right? That's one of those things we've been hearing about forever and ever. But for companies, though, that didn't have a more flexible infrastructure and went into the pandemic, found themselves flat-footed on how to react to how do I do changing business models and all these kind of things. The ones that had invested in that, it still may have been expensive and painful, but they were able to make the pivot and sort of those sorts of things. And so because of that, I think a lot of industries did say, hey, as part of we need to get to that sort of newer modern infrastructure, newer applications, and Edge is a part of that. So we're not going to let off the gas pedal. We're actually going to sort of press the part.
Yeah. That 17% number I thought was very interesting. 17% who thought Edge was strategic, and 17% who thought it was business essential, and the rest thought it was strategic investment. That was a very interesting statistic. Ali, I'm really interested to hear you on this as well. Did you see a big increase in use of Edge resources during COVID? Did that have you force you to bring forward build out that you weren't expecting to?
Well, I'll answer that question in a different way.
Okay.
I mean, we're here at Edge Computing World, and the way I see it is CDNs aren't edge computing; they're just delivery. And there is a significant difference on when you are actually rendering content and using that compute, especially accelerated compute. I think, as I mentioned before, we're at very early stages of increasing that type of edge computing, especially as collaboration becomes even increasingly important between doing remote work, and as businesses see the importance of using things like VR or AR to do experiences like what Albert has showed. So I think the amount of business that's coming, obviously it's we're very bullish about it. That's why we have the partnerships that we're doing with and that I've spoken about, and our customers are asking for it, and we're delivering on those. So edge computing, as much as CDN, edge delivery for media is, I think, are both significant business growth opportunities for a telco like us. And I think that answers what you had in a different way.
It does. And I want to actually follow up with something else that you said. We'll stay with you, and then I'm really interested in actually, I'm going to do something a little bit different after we hear from you. You mentioned a sort of rough timetable or what was going on that would make our mobile phones unnecessary. Talk us through that and talk us how the edge is enabling that.
So if I understand your question, is what's enabling the elimination of the phone as we know it? Is
Yes,
that what your question is?
Exactly.
Right. I think there's several different aspects that's happening, and obviously mobile edge compute is one. I think battery technology is another. The ability to have devices run more efficiently with different kinds of chipsets coming from Qualcomm and other manufacturers are playing a part. I think the network also is a huge component as we roll out some of the 3GPP standards for release 16 and 17. Those also help with a lot of the battery issues. They help with delivering content much faster and with less jitter, so it doesn't have to repeat itself. So that's a big component. But I think ultimately the software is driving a lot of the ways that we consider using our phone. I think augmented reality, the way that it's being implemented to drive things like remote learning, remote assistance, those use cases, especially in enterprise, is going to enable the worker to being a lot more efficient. And as organizations are seeing that efficiency, that I can get connectivity, the phone, the call, and augmented remote assistance with a wearable, why am I going to give them a phone? And I think that in itself is a downward trajectory for the phone as we know it. That's my job, is really to kind of get that going as fast as possible. I mean, I'm building things like this that enable 5G connected devices to have 5G for wearables, so you can do that much faster and bring it to reality quickly.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask each of the panelists now to sort of weigh in on this, and I want to refine it a little bit. How long before I can leave my phone or compute device or whatever in my pocket or even at home and just rely on, say, glasses to be my communication mechanism and maybe my gaming mechanism as well? So why don't we start with you, Albert? Give me an answer in 30 seconds. What do you think? How long is that going to happen, and how long before?
I think it should happen for us, but it's definitely going there. And then I'm staying in Korea right now because of one of the biggest the project that we're actually working with. The name. The big company is actually creating several different type of glass devices, working with Microsoft. So hopefully next year, and then the next year will be the Apple's the Play. So next year and the next year will be like laying out the foundation, and after that it will be like more casual type of devices will be populating the whole market.
Yeah.
So about 3 years. Yeah.
3 years. Wow.
Yeah.
3 years. Great. Zach, what do you think?
I think it depends on a couple of things. I think it depends on who you is. I don't know. I think in places like Korea, where they just have better fiber and better computing, it's a smaller country. I think it'll be way faster than big places like the United States. And I also think it depends on the depth of experience. Speaking from a games perspective, I think the things Albert is doing is super cool. For like a deeply competitive FPS to be available on your glasses, like I don't know anyone in the industry right now who's working on that. So like I would say maybe a little bit longer. I would say sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, that sounds reasonable. But I think some of the enhancements that the panel is talking about, I think they're way more apt to give a good answer than I am.
Yeah. So Dave, what do you think?
My goodness. So, I mean, I'm ready for the implant. I want to skip past the glasses and just go in there.
I'm just watching Picard with all the Borgs, so don't go there.
But the Generation 2, I want Generation 2, not the first one. But I think the issue is, I guess the way to describe this to me is I think it's 10 years out at least. And the reason why I think that isn't necessarily from the technology perspective, but like when Google Glass came out, we saw the sort of like social impact of people being concerned about, just privacy concerns and all sorts of things. Like I feel like we're not over that yet as a society. So, I think this whole idea that I leave my phone in my pocket and just navigate the world, I think that is far off. However, on the flip side, I think that there's, back to the like, is edge computing real, right? Like, I mean, Zach is doing it today, right, with real games and stuff. And all it takes is like a little bit of extra to be able to work that in like maybe the privacy of your home and do stuff like that. So I think there's definitely some near-term wins. I'm just not necessarily so bullish on that full on, like I'm ready to like enter my virtual experience for
Colin, I would say that, I would say that the specific use case types of wearables will happen much sooner than your everyday wear. For example, you'll have a device that you use in the vehicle that isn't the heads-up display that's built into the car, but it's in every car that you go in. You're going to have the heads-up. You'll have the device that you'll use when you do sports. It's very specific for the type of sport or the type of activity you're doing, and it's tuned for that. And because it's tuned to that, the compute is different. It's not trying to do everything for everybody. The compute's different, so the load on it and the availability is different. You're going to get, like what the military is doing or firefighters are providing with AR wearables. They're going to have it, in a different way than we see it or law enforcement sees it. So I think you're going to see a lot of specialized type of wearables that leave the phone behind. And then ultimately, once we get these privacy concerns done and figured out, then you're going to see a combination of that wearable. I think I'm going to put my bets on by the end of the, next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very exciting. I have one last question for each of you, and again, let's do this in a sort of quick fire format, and then we're about to wrap up here. So I'd like you to name one technology or content type or process that you think will have a big impact on the extended media market in the next couple of years. So why don't we start with Dave on this one?
Oh my goodness, one thing. I guess it just gets back to application platforms that are designed for more distributed kind of environments, and we're already seeing this with containers, but I think it needs to level up even from there to really support edge. And so I think solving some of that complexity and how you sort of develop and deploy these applications at scale is really what we need to solve next.
Yeah, very good. Albert, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit out of topic from the edge computing, but the crypto. We've been asking our users to generate content, and also like telcos providing all the necessary infrastructure. And then, as I said, who's going to pay for everything, right? And then why I'm doing this one. And when we started to implement this NFT and crypto, so that you generate content for money, and then all the telcos involving in our service, they get something out of it from some portion of the crypto they generated. So, and now everyone is happy because they all get something out of whatever activities inside of the with our service. So I think that will definitely accelerate whole different mechanism for metaverse and then the edge computing.
Very good. Ali, what do you think?
Well, I think it's AI. If you look at what OpenAI's Codex is doing, it's just phenomenal. When you tie that in with our ability to do edge computing, the ability to ingest APIs using natural language processing, incorporating many different kinds of programming languages. Imagine a world as you walk with your wearable, you ask for what you want, and code is being written for you. So the bespoke way of building applications individually, Colin, you get to build the application that you want at the time you need it using AI. And, it could be tying into some sort of building management system, or it could be some digital twin API. You don't really care because the AI knows it, billions of lines of code, writes it for you, it gets processed and then rendered at the edge, and then you're seeing it immediately. I think that's the exciting part about this.
Wow. All right, Zach, you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think I'm going to go a bit more boring than everybody else. I think it's innovations like the public cloud in a box that are going to matter, because I think you basically bring their entire serverless thing further and further away from traditional edges, like closer to people's homes. And I think the more we see things like that, I think a lot of the problems that are latency based today start to really go away for those who can afford it. So to me that could be a really big one, a really sneaky one that's already happening.
I would give it for that one thumbs up on that one.
Great. Well, this has been a super session. Albert, Zach, Ali, Dave, thank you so much for your great thoughts on this topic, and thank you everybody
Thank you,
for
Colin.
listening.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.